Hello. Good morning. How are you? Great to see you. Amazing. It's not even raining today. We've had so much rain lately. Good morning. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. It's so great to see all of you here. Thanks for coming. In case you were new to us, the Center for an Urban Future is a think tank focused on creating a stronger and more inclusive economy in New York City. Through research reports and policy events like this one, we elevate concrete opportunities and ideas that help create a lot more good jobs, expand access to those well-paying jobs, and ensure a lot more New Yorkers can climb into the middle class. For example, in the past couple of years, Cuff's work inspired the creation of CUNY Reconnect, which is helping thousands of working adults to re-enroll at CUNY and get a credential that can vault them into a better paying job. We also contributed to a major expansion in apprenticeship programs in high-wage sectors like finance and tech. And we helped spark the expansion of CUNY 2X Tech, a program that has succeeded in helping CUNY students access tech careers. Obviously, there's a whole lot more New York is going to need to do in the months and years ahead to restore economic security and economic mobility. In fact, I think one of the clear takeaways from last week's election is that too few people today feel like they have a legitimate shot at getting ahead. Changing this will require a host of new policies and investments, almost certainly starting with making the city a lot more affordable. But part of the solution will be to create more well-paying jobs and ensure a lot more New Yorkers are able to access those jobs. In today's economy, the best chance to do this is with the tech sector, which has been by far New York's fastest growing source of new high and middle wage jobs. It's crucial that we keep this going. To do so, New York is going to need to capture a significant share of the growth expected in a range of emerging tech fields. Few will be as important as artificial intelligence, a field that many believe will not only be one of the fastest growing segments of the tech sector in the years ahead, but a key driver of growth in industries across the city's economy. The good news is that New York already has a strong head start, and it has many of the building blocks needed for success in AI. But the future of this rapidly changing field is still very much up in the air, and several other cities and states are already making big bets on AI. At the same time, it's not yet clear that there are ample accessible pathways into AI-powered jobs. I'm really excited that today's forum will explore exactly what New York should do to maximize this opportunity with AI, while also mitigating the very real risks that AI poses. We have some amazing speakers here today to delve into this topic. Thanks to all of them for being here. I'm also excited to let you know that tomorrow, my colleagues and I at the Center for an Urban Future will be publishing a new report in partnership with Winston Fisher and Fisher Brothers with 5 ideas that we think city leaders should run with to maximize New York City's opportunity with AI. You could check out a sneak peek of that report by clicking on the QR code that's on your agenda today. Before we get started with our panel, I would like to extend a very big thank you to our longtime friend and partner, Winston Fisher. For making today's event possible and supporting and partnering with us on our Middle Class Jobs Project. Winston, we've been so proud to collaborate with you for so many years now to shine a light on ideas and opportunities to both strengthen and create a middle class in New York. Ideas that I think are going to be more important than ever going forward. So let's get this panel started now, and if I can have all the panelists come up and our great moderator, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, the amazing Julie Samuels. You probably all know her, but just in case, yeah, Julie is please. Julie is the CEO and president of Tech NYC, and I can list a bunch of other things, but I'll just say she's also one of the key architects of Governor Hochul's ambitious Empire AI initiative. Thanks for doing this, Julie.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks. Here we go. I'm super excited about this conversation. and I'm super excited to talk to all of you about this and to really kind of flesh out really smart ideas, which is what Cuff and the team at Cuff always does. So this is just this is really great. I'm going to just ask you guys to go down and introduce yourselves so that I'm not droning on, and just say who you are and where you're from. And then I've got a whole bunch of questions and we'll dive in. So Winston, let me start with you.
Hi, Winston Fisher. I am a partner at Fisher Brothers, which is a traditional real estate company of development, own, operate, but I also am CEO and founder of a creative entertainment company called Area 15, headquartered in Las Vegas. So I split my time between New York, Vegas, and flying all over the country these days.
Hi, I'm Aneto. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Remarkable AI. We help a lot of leading brands do one-to-one personalized messaging with consumers. So brands like Unilever and a lot of consumer brands like Olaplex and New Era Cap. And I live in downtown Brooklyn. I've been building this company, software company here in New York for the last 7 years.
Hi, I'm Matt Hartman. I run Factorial. I was at a firm called BetaWorks for 10 years where we built companies and invested. And at Factorial, I partnered with a set of people that I backed in the past to invest in technical founders, and our whole network emanates from New York, and we run out of an office in Dumbo.
Hi, I'm Priya Ramanathan, head of partnerships at FutureFit AI. We're a New York City-based workforce development technology company thinking about how AI can help job seekers learn about career pathways, training programs, job opportunities, and thinking about how we fold in employers into this ecosystem. We predominantly partner with government nonprofit organizations, really thinking about kind of ecosystem connectivity. And I am a New York City born and bred workforce development person, so I've worked for the city and for nonprofit organizations like Perscolis as well. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hi, I'm Maria Gotch. I run the Partnership Fund for New York City. We are a nonprofit impact fund backed by major corporations. We invest locally, both in low-income neighborhoods and also in the technology sector. And more recently, we are focused on making investments in technology in the public interest.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at Center for an Urban Future, co-author of our report coming out tomorrow about maximizing New York City's AI opportunity, and I'll be moderating. Oh wait, no, hold on a second.
Yeah.
And it's really great to be on the panel for this conversation.
Job today. No pressure.
You today, Julie, and AI tomorrow.
Yeah, right. That's right. We're all out of work. We're all out of work tomorrow. Actually, let's start with that. Winston, I want to start with you. We were talking kind of at the beginning about how we're seeing some of these technologies start to pop up. And I think you were telling me how you just came back from the West Coast. So I was hoping you can kind of tee that up a little bit here.
Yeah, so I was just out in LA, and it was fascinating because I took the driverless Uber, Waymo, to dinner, and it drove all through the streets of LA, navigated it great, quiet, got to put my music on, whatever I want. As we're going into dinner, you see multiple robots going by that are delivering food all over the place. They have all these little things and they're just carts that are driving all over the place. At the same time, I'm using ChatGPT to ask it questions, to ask questions about different topics as I'm doing all of this. So I was literally sitting there thinking, this isn't the future anymore, it's here. We are in driverless cars that are actually commercialized, that you are taking out. Deliveries are, even on the Uber app out there, it says you won't have to tip if we give you a robot. Right, so it's here, and then what impact does that have? And it was so profound how fast it's moving. And I think about New York, what does happen? What does happen when all of a sudden there are these driverless cars, which are really they are good. They're coming, and they're going to probably be mandated by the insurance market more than anything else. So the change will happen quickly.
Yeah, and the changes obviously can have upsides and downsides. Of course, and will have both, not just can. Eli, I would love for you to kind of build off that for a second. And as you think about how this city is going to evolve its economic development playbook to address these changes, where you see the most exciting opportunities, and also where you see some of the challenges.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Julie. Well, I would start by saying I think there is a huge opportunity here. I mean, as Jonathan mentioned, no industry's added more well-paying jobs than tech over the past 15 years, 130 plus thousand. And we need more good jobs in New York City. We've seen generally over the past decade, we've created more jobs at the very top and many more at the very bottom than we have in the middle. So what we need to be doing is growing the industries where middle-class jobs of the future can be created. And tech is that industry today, and I think it will be tomorrow. And AI is probably the fastest growing, most exciting part of tech. So there is a lot of opportunity there. I don't disagree. There's huge potential risks for job dislocation. I think more so changing jobs than eliminating them. Certainly, if you look at history as a guide, everybody thought the same thing about the personal computer, and it's created millions more jobs than it destroyed, but it did destroy some, many, and it changed more than either it created or destroyed. So I think we're looking at maybe something similar this time. It's a little too soon to say, but there's a lot of opportunity there. What I think New York needs to do differently is use an set of economic tools that we don't necessarily have today. We need to create them. We need to create tools that AI builders and founders would be responsive to. And we've got tools that work for other industries, tax incentives, relocation assistance, help with financing, low-cost financing for capital build-outs and things like that. But AI builders that we talked to, at least for our research, they weren't really that excited about those tools. They weren't moving the needle for them. What I think the new economic development playbook needs to do is build on New York's strengths, what makes New York a better place to build AI than other places, which is not only our talent pool, which we need to continue to build, but it's what makes New York, New York. Our diversity, our culture, our art, our parks, all the things that make people want to be here when they could choose to be anywhere. And we need to do a lot to sustain those things and make sure that those things are strong and vibrant and vital. But the other thing we need to do, I think, is build some tools that we don't really have today, that AI builders, I think, would be particularly excited about, that build off of New York's big strengths. So I think a couple of those things, I'll just mention a couple and we can go from there. One is, look, every AI company needs two things, right? They need compute and they need data. And what New York doesn't have yet is much in the way of compute. We're buying it from cloud-based servers, and we're buying that from other places. But we're starting to do that with Empire AI, and we could do more of it. We can talk more about that. But what New York City has in spades is data. The problem is that the data is hard to access. So one of the things that we write about in our report out tomorrow is massively unlocking access to the city's own data as a real incentive for AI builders to actually build their tools and services here. And potentially we could offer more interesting, exciting data than any other place in the world. We've done some of the infrastructure to do that. We have what was a really innovative open data program launched over a decade ago. But I think that program isn't cutting edge anymore. So we can talk more about that. But we could make that one of the big selling points to building a company here. And I think the other thing I'd point to in terms of what founders are looking for that New York could exclusively or uniquely offer is the ability to solve problems at the scale of New York City. If you can build tools and services that work here and prove your model here, other companies, other cities are going to come knocking. Well, we haven't done that yet. We could do a lot more of it. That looks like a little very different than what procurement for government looks like today, typically. We proposed the idea of 3 new challenge-based procurements, which require the city to rewrite its rules around procurement, which it's actually starting to do, which would go from essentially bidding on a scope of work to proposing novel solutions to a specific problem, with the city not putting its finger on the scale and saying, this is how you need to solve the problem, but just saying, here's the problem. Maybe it's safer streets, maybe it's affordable housing, maybe it's making our social services more effective and efficient and humane, and then saying, you propose to us how you're going to solve that problem. The winner gets a pilot program with some real dollars behind it, and if the pilot's successful, written into that agreement would be the opportunity for it to scale up, and companies have a limited runway, and if they could do business with the city at a reasonable scale, a few $1 million contract, that could be pretty exciting incentive. So those are a couple of things that we're thinking about in terms of what does that economic playbook look like for an AI economy.
Just responding to what you said. If you think about the backbone of today's world, right? So you have the MTA, you have the Port Authority. They are critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure in today's world, or one of the aspects, is data and compute. A new government agency that is actually all about digital infrastructure for New York City, New York State, because it has to be a relentless focus or it won't happen, right? It is that imperative that New York gets structured data and gets the compute power, or it won't be competitive. I don't know. I mean, so it's kind of a different way of thinking about it, because I think it requires something completely bold and transformative for New York to be competitive. Throw that to you.
Quickly build on that. I'd say, I think one of the key economic development tools in general, obviously, is investing in infrastructure. So I completely agree. I think seeing data as the economic infrastructure of the future makes a lot of sense. And frankly, the city needs some help. You know, I mean, the city's got the Office of Technology Innovation. It's working on this. But when you look at the data on the data, you see that, look, most city agencies are required to publish this data because of the open data law from over a decade ago, and most don't comply. You know, they get there eventually. Some of them do, some of them don't. But typically, when you look at how many data sets were updated on time within the past year, you know, as of a couple months ago, it was 6%, 7%, you know, we're really low. Agencies need investment in their own data infrastructure to be able to comply. They also need leadership that says we're going to make this a priority, and it ranges wildly between different agencies. Some of them got pretty close to compliance, and some are really lagging behind. So there's a big opportunity, I think, there to invest in that, even just on the public sector side, investing in data as essential infrastructure.
I think we've seen over the years that a lot of the challenges that city government, well, all government, but that city government has vis-a-vis tech isn't the technical so much as the kind of cultural and some of the other structural government issues. So Maria, I'm looking at you with that setup. By the way, I should say there's so much, Eli, in your answer that we're going to dig into. We're going to talk more about data. We're going to talk more about compute. We're going to talk more about all of these ideas. But Maria, let's talk for a second about you've been investing in companies in the public sector space here in New York for a long time now with a lot of success. And I would just love to hear how you are thinking about that work as AI is becoming more and more relevant and more part of the conversation, and where you see the best opportunities for success.
Sure, and I'm going to build off of something that you said, which is what entrepreneurs need. In the AI space, they do need data, but they need talent, they need money, and they need customers. And the piece that we have focused on is the customer piece with respect to government. And there are many forces that are against government taking a risk to bring on new technology. They're not rewarded for it typically. There's typically not funding from the agency, wherever they're working, to fund an innovation team that has the relationships to go out and find technology, do the vetting, et cetera. So in addition to investing in some of these companies, we have put together a process where we partner with a particular agency and we help them identify new technologies and then go through a multi-step testing process. And it's one thing to have a challenge, which is a one-off, and I think government over the years has done challenges, and that typically ends up rewarding interesting ideas, but it doesn't always necessarily get it into the agency. And so I think I agree with you on the challenge-based procurement, but the key there is not just the challenge part, but the procurement part. Because that's often where these challenges drop down, is they have a wonderful challenge, great ideas, and then, oh, by the way, there's now a 3-year procurement process that you have to go through, and the entrepreneur says, I'm going to the private sector. So I think the new law that's just got passed around challenge-based procurement will be helpful to that. But at the same time, work has to be done internally within the agencies to get the operating people that are going to use that technology comfortable with it, for them to understand that it's going to help make their job better and simpler, and actually going to result in improvement. So our experience is that when you put interesting technology in the hands of the operating people and you put them in the driver's seat in terms of the selection and the testing, what we're actually seeing is a bit of a culture change and an interest by very hardworking, very dedicated city employees who want to actually do a better job in their day-to-day job, and don't always have the tools. So I think there is definitely a way to do this. On the data piece, I don't know that there's any city agency, first of all, that has a chief data officer, so that would be a good place to start. Somebody who's thinking about the data. There are interesting and serious privacy issues, and that's typically why government has stayed away from big control of the data, is they don't want to get into the privacy issues are complicated, et cetera. So the idea of having centralized data is interesting, but I guess the piece of that I'd want to make sure is that government somehow benefited financially from that data, and that it was not a here sector, here AI entrepreneurs, here's all of our data, and then develop an interesting product and then come back and sell it to us. And I want government to make sure that that's an asset that they are earning some revenue off of in order to help close budget deficits.
Go, I was going to actually ask you guys to respond to that.
Yeah, I'd love to build on all of these ideas. I think there's a famous accelerator program called Y Combinator, which probably a lot of people are aware of. And sometimes they put out this request for startups, which is basically ideas of different companies you could build. Because I think that's something, as an entrepreneur myself, you have this idea like, hey, I want to start a company, but you need to go and talk to customers and actually solve problems, and then you can build a business from that. And I think just sharing ideas, like if every agency and nonprofit that's affiliated with the city was actually encouraged to, hey, just describe all the problems you have, and that was publicized and marketed, like a lot of entrepreneurs would say, oh, that's interesting, I want to come solve that problem. Because fundamentally, as an entrepreneur, you're driven by, I want to solve problems for people, I want to build things that can scale and have a huge impact. And giving you that seed of something to work on, I think would be very exciting. And I think a lot of the problems that New York City has are, universal problems or scalable problems for other cities. And I frankly, I'm disappointed when I see entrepreneurs working on problems that are not meaningful. I wish they could work on some of these problems that are important for the city or for the world. So that's like one idea which doesn't cost much, which is actually to encourage all these agencies to put out things. I'm sure that's what like the Transit Tech Lab and others do, but what if it was pervasive and universal and everyone had to do it? Put out your problems so that other people can come and solve them. And I think sharing the rewards of that is important too, and the procurement is important too, but it has to start from what actually are the problems to solve.
Something that comes to mind as in this particular conversation is the challenges the city has in hiring tech talent. And I think hopefully in the long term, that will start to solve itself. There's a lot of structural reasons that's the case, but there's also in the near term, there's a struggle to hire technical talent, even in the private sector. So I'm going to, again, turn to you three in the middle. If you could talk a little bit about what hiring the right talent looks like in New York and how that's been playing out at your companies.
You go ahead. You go first.
I think you go first.
Oh, do you want me to go? Well,
You're a company.
so it's interesting because we're most of our technical talent is not here in New York, but I think something that's really important from a workforce development perspective is I think just access and understanding what these roles actually are. So when we think about entry and mid-level talent, I think there's just a real lack of awareness of what these jobs are, how do I learn about them, how do I make that transition, and what education allows me to really make that transition in a really seamless way. And I think right now what we're seeking to do is really help job seekers and agencies who support those organizations really help make those connections on behalf of job seekers, because I think we'll probably get to this later in the conversation, but one of the very scary things about AI is this kind of growing demand and skills gap. And how do we help empower our workers here in New York City versus, or in addition to attracting net new talent to the region as well. So for us, we're really thinking about how do we support that local ecosystem and really think about that preparation capability to connect the dots so that we are able to give more opportunity for local New Yorkers to really make that transition and really be able to feed our need for local tech talent as well.
Can I ask you where is most of your tech talent, if it's not here?
Canada.
Canada.
Yeah.
Canada. What about, well, I'm going to ask Anito, you and Matt, the companies you're investing in, what you're seeing with regard to hiring tech talent as well.
Sure. So most of our engineering is actually in Europe, disappointingly so. I think it's because we as a startup can't afford to pay what engineers in New York might be expecting. I was talking to a lady at Meta a few years ago, and she said she was on $600K. And that's like her salary, not even like her stock, which is liquid. So I don't make anywhere near that for sure. And that'd be like 4 people in Poland, for example. So that's just the reality of the situation. I was talking to an entrepreneur who was thinking about moving his business from, let's say, the UK to the US. And he was asking about the cost of living, right, and real estate. And we all know that's a challenge. So that's the challenge, I think, for attracting like very high earners to your company is, can you afford them? The other way, which we've taken, is you hire for potential. Right? I think people who don't have as much experience but are excited, they're quick to learn, and you can coach them. I worked at Google for many years. Our CTO worked at Google for many years. So we can train people, and you just have to be willing to invest that in those people. And I think what's exciting about this version of AI is that it's actually leveling the playing field a lot. Those kind of long-term software engineering skills are less useful, actually, because you can use all these AI code developers to help you. So I think that's what I would give the challenge to the city is, are there young people who are graduating school who you can actually upskill? You take someone senior, you pair them up, and you use all of these AI tools to actually get the best quality for a lower price, because you just can't afford what these big tech companies are paying.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we're seeing, a number of our investments are in AI companies based out of New York. I think that when we talk about talent, I think there's different sort of bands of talent. There are people who, at least in my experience, are just motivated by wanting to have data that they can use to build a new kind of foundational model, and they will not work at a place that doesn't have data because that's not interesting to them. And there's people who, you have people who are kind of shipping code. So if you divide developers into kind of people who are potentially could be using an AI co-pilot to be able to write code as separate from people who are training these models, there's actually starting to be, it feels to me like there's starting to be this kind of critical mass of people coming out of PhD programs, whether it's here or elsewhere, who want to move to New York, who are picking New York to come here for reasons that frankly, I don't know that have to do with technology. It has to do with not having a monoculture and being able to go see a show and meeting somebody at a party who isn't also in tech with a startup and talking about that all the time. Like a lot of these are the motivating factors to kind of stay here. But we're seeing a good number of people who are genuinely building kind of foundational technology here. New York doesn't have a monopoly on that. But I'm excited by that they're sort of, when we're investing, we're looking for almost the supply of that kind of talent because it's very hard. Otherwise, you have to buy it. And as a startup, it's really hard to buy, as these two are both saying, it's really hard to buy the talent. So if you are a person who came out of a program who is building something interesting, that is much easier to attract talent to your company.
I love the conversation around the other things that make New York attractive. We see that, that's not AI specific, we see that across the tech sector and across, obviously, all kinds of sectors. Anita, you chose to build your company here. You spent time on the West Coast, right, and came here. So I was hoping you could kind of build off what Matt's talking about. Like, tell us why you decided to do it here.
Yeah, so a lot of the reasons he just named, I spent a lot of time on the West Coast and prefer the society in New York better for all those reasons. But when you're building a company, similar to I think what Maria mentioned, the first thing you need is customers. We serve mostly retail and consumer brands. The majority of those actually are on the East Coast here in New York or in LA. Not so much in San Francisco. So for our type of company, being close to customers is very important. And that has played out exactly. A lot of our customers are here in New York and we can see them in person. The second is access to capital. New York has continued to grow as a source of capital. Folks like Matt and there are many other investors in the area, and being able to meet those people in person is also very important. I think finally is access to talent. Not necessarily technical talent, but all of our, let's say, customer success, sales, we're actually able to get a lot of great people here, or bring people in from other industries who are trying to get into tech because they can command higher wages and they're more excited by the opportunity. And all those three things have played out. I think still New York lags in the tech talent and in the funding area, but is growing. And those are some areas where if the city can continue to stimulate, similar to what Maria's doing, like that can help to close the gap on getting more funding and more tech talent would be great.
Eli, let me talk to you for a second to kind of build on what we've been talking about here about what we think the specific opportunities that are unique for New York look like. I think about this a lot. I take tons of meetings and people are always like, well, there are all these startups in Hayes Valley in San Francisco and they should all be here. And my feeling is like, no, we're not. Like that's what they do and that's good. But what we do in New York is going to be different. And I'm going to throw this to you first, but anyone else who wants to weigh in, I think there's going to be kind of like a uniquely New York way that we do this. And I want to drill down on what those attributes are. It's the ideas you were talking about, but I think it's a little more than that. There's a cultural overlay too. So what does success look like? That's the New York version.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. I think part of it is, but I'm not going to repeat what folks have already said, but absolutely, New York as a cultural hub for the world in a way that the Bay Area isn't. People want to be here for all those reasons, but I think they're also inspired by those things. Not just especially maybe some of the non-tech things, art and culture and music and nightlife and food, but also how that actually impacts the kind of companies that they're building. The fact that folks on their teams have other interests and other perspectives and points of view. The diversity of the teams here is significantly better than it is in the Bay Area. They've got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but our tech workforce in New York is much more diverse than the workforce in the Bay Area, and that's a strength that we need to keep building on. I would also say that this shows up in the data in an interesting way. So we looked at job postings data just to try to get a sense of not only how many tech jobs that are specifically in AI are growing, they're growing rapidly, but how many jobs in general in New York City's economy are looking for folks with AI-related skills. And what that showed us was pretty interesting. First of all, that we actually had more job postings last year in New York City looking for AI skills than San Francisco did. Now, again, we're a lot bigger than San Francisco proper, but it says something. We had over almost 15,000 job postings alone in New York City looking for AI-related skills compared to about 9,000 in San Francisco. But a big part of that is also, and that, by the way, that's up 50% from the year prior, so we're seeing the growth there. But where I'm going with this is to say a lot of that demand is outside of the tech sector. So you're seeing across the board companies in many legacy industries, in real estate, in healthcare, in financial services, all of which are now looking for AI talent. And I think that speaks to what New York's opportunity is going to be. One of the opportunities going forward is at the intersection of all of these different industries, as the tech sector itself has grown and matured over the past 15 years. And honestly, that's a big challenge for New York as well. These are key parts of our economy today that will look very different in 5 years, let alone 10 years than they do today. If they don't change and adapt, they're going to struggle. And that's going to be a real risk. That is a real risk for New York as our key industries outside of tech confront major existential threats. But there's huge opportunity there as well, which is should be the global hub of AI in all of these different industries. How these industries adapt and change and transform in an AI-powered future. And the folks that want to build those technologies and those tools, they're going to want to be here. But we need to lean into that as an imperative so that our economy continues to modernize, but also as a real opportunity and strength for New York, because you've got access to problems that are more interesting than other places, and data that's more interesting than other places, and talent from other industries that can shine a light in ways that they can't if you're only coming from tech. So those are some of the things I think we got to build on.
I'd love to build on this. Yeah, I think that New York has a huge population, as we know. And that can actually help in two ways. One is by usage. So the biggest sector that's getting all the investment right now is AI. You see it in the stock market, you see it in startups, but all these companies are building infrastructure and building applications, but they still need someone to use it, right? And it's happening organically. People here are using ChatGPT, but what if the city said like everyone should be using it? Not necessarily ChatGPT, there are others. There's Claude, there's Gemini, and many others, but actually everyone should be using it to write your resume, to write an email, to write a letter. And if there's a ton of usage coming from New York, that'll make those companies also pay attention and invest more here. How would that look like? Like everyone, hopefully most people ride the subway. Imagine if everything you saw was telling you, hey, you should be using more AI. That would actually help companies like myself as well. One of the things that's driving a lot of our sales is boards and management teams telling their team, hey, you should be using more AI. So when we show up with Remarkable AI and our software helps them, they're like, hey, I should be using more AI. Let me take a demo of this AI company. And so getting more people to use AI products as part of their daily life, as part of their work, helps those people, helps the companies, and attracts more investment because of the usage. When I worked at Google, people talk about focus on the user and all else will follow. So if there's more usage here, that's going to attract more investment and more people. And then the other side of it is the supply side. One of the reasons we started the company is we saw an opportunity to use AI to create jobs. So how does AI create jobs? Because we're always talking about AI destroying jobs. One of the kind of hidden secrets of the industry, which I observed at Google, is that you need humans to actually label the data. So the reason why ChatGPT works so well is because there's labeled data of all these conversations. And there's hundreds of thousands of people in the US and all around the world who are labeling conversations, and they're making money. My mom actually took it up as like a part-time job to like label conversations, because she's a professor in history, so she was labeling history conversations and making money. And then my aunt started doing it, so it's really funny. All this self-driving cars, people have labeled all these videos and all these, and it's like still a continuous industry. So, thousands of people work on our platform labeling conversations for us. That's a way for, let's say, lower income or even some middle income people to make extra money labeling conversations, basically feeding the machine. And so stimulating that growth and making New York one of the top places for labeling as well as consumption is going to attract even more of the things you guys want to see.
So,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We've got some, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna do Maria
so two-
and Winston, and we're gonna Maria, because I want to follow up on that. Yeah. Okay.
So 2 points. At some point, AI is going to stop being an industry and start being a tool, like the internet. And I think for that to happen, it's just going to become embedded in every core industry that's out there. So we need to keep that sort of in mind for where the future is going. And then in terms of entrepreneurs, they come to New York because of the cultural stuff. They stay here because they're successful, and they build good companies that make them a lot of money and hopefully their shareholders a lot of money. So I think this leaning into where those 2 points are going, is that it means about leaning into the customer, whether the customer is the public or the customer is a big financial institution or a big media company or the public sector. It's about figuring out how do you connect those pieces in a more explicit way to help those entrepreneurs ramp up much faster. And so this idea of you've got a domain expertise, you've got experience and talent, PhDs to build the AI, but you're building the AI for a specific use case, and that's where the expertise, the domain expertise from New York's very big core industries that are all interested and want to get AI comes in, and it's that the magic is the marriage between the two. It's the scale, it's the expertise, and it's the deep desire of those industries and knowledge that they know they need to bring those tools in that is going to make New York, I think, a leader in AI, but more in I don't want to say fully an applied way, but that's, I think, where we're going to lead and where we should lean into. And then I think the core will follow.
Can I just quickly, once I'm going to go to you, but I have a little anecdote I love to tell that I think kind of builds on what you're saying. I used to live in San Francisco, and I had, a lot of my friends worked at Google, and it was a long time ago. And if you talk to them about where they work, they would tell you they're working at a company or they're organizing the world's information. Maybe they would tell you it was a search company. And then I moved here and we started Tech NYC, and and I was talking to some people who were in the Google office here at the same time. And if you asked them what kind of company they worked at the exact same time, they would tell you it was an ad tech company. And it just like made my head explode. And I was like, oh my God. And it speaks to different places having different kind of core skills. And when people in New York, I think, Maria, to your point, if we get it right, it will be because we take this tool. And right now, the term AI, people are terrified. They don't know. It's not even
means
terrified.
many
They're
things.
confused. It's meaningless almost. But it's not just the application, but it's about the demystification. It's about putting it in people's hands, in people's pockets, on whatever tool, and that's what's going to open the aperture. So, Winston.
What Marie said I agree with, because it's not just AI as a company who's creating AI. We're using AI all the time. So how? I mentioned two companies. One is we've taken all of our leases, we've put it into a structured database. Now we have something we can search and we can find connections between what's happening with a lease and building operations right away. Now we're an AI company. We're using it for our CRM system. We're using it for marketing process. We're literally using it for pre-arrival for guests coming on the entertainment company, create their avatar. That avatar becomes their concierge, knows everything about our company. It creates a personal relationship with them, and then it navigates them through a gameplay as they walk through the space. Are we an AI company? We're not. By default, we are. So it's not just us creating the AI, it's us actually looking at all the different ways AI can be adopted. New York has to do that. Every business should become an AI-powered business. That's actually the transformation that New York needs. AI companies will flourish when every business becomes one. But the other thing that's important, though, is I think for government, and this is obviously a personal belief, it's the big things. Get it right. And if you can't get the big things right, nothing else works. What are the big things? You do need to have a system. You need a government that has a relentless focus on helping with data and compute power. That is actually a critical component for success in the AI world. You need affordable housing, right? Like, you need people moving here. You need this. You need the arts and culture. You need safety. You need basic infrastructure like subways and bridges and tunnels to work. It's really the big things. And when you get the big things right, the industry will flourish underneath it if you have good priority and focus. So I like the micro ideas, but honestly, for government, focus on the big, because the market will flourish if you give them those tools.
Priya.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere I think on the spectrum of this conversation is like where individuals are in really thinking about AI as a tool versus AI as a core part of business. And somewhere between where you are, where you're solutioning and using AI every day, and somewhere where Aneto is talking about usage, there's education. And I think there's the fear comes from the lack of education. And something I was just chatting with a group of folks about before is I did a panel with frontline workforce development folks about AI, and the number of questions I got about where do I start, I think was huge. And I think that where do I start is really, I think, where we can work backwards to understand whose responsibility it is to really build this education, not just for people who are looking for net new employment, but people who are currently working. So when we think about industry and incumbent workforce training, I think there's an incredible opportunity to really think about how we think about that mid-level core section. But I really do see that before usage, there's education. I think that can really dispel some of this fear and this demystification issue that we're thinking about really, really deeply. Because I bet a lot of this room uses AI every day, and there are people who don't even know where to start. So how do we really focus on that? Where do we start to kind of move that along? And I think the government piece of this is really key too. Where are government agencies in this? Where do we start conversation?
I want to dive into something that you talked about, and Eli, you talked about too. When you talk about kind of the middle, not the high end, the barbell effect that we talk about a lot in employment, which is that New York does a really great job of retaining the very highly skilled jobs and the low skilled jobs, but the middle we have a tougher time with. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but I want to apply that to this conversation specifically. And you two both brought that up in different contexts, but a similar theme. So I'm going to throw it back. Eli, why don't we start with you and talk about how we should be thinking about trying to make sure that New York has opportunity in that middle. And part of the reason I'll quickly say I worry so much about that is those jobs in the middle tend to be the ones that have the most upward mobility. And I think it's really important for our economy and for New Yorkers who live here to have access to those types of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things I worry about the most. I mean, honestly, I do worry about the impacts of job dislocation from AI. And we wrote about this several years ago before the explosion of generative AI through the Middle Class Jobs Project, just looking at the risk of automation in general in our economy. And of course, our big takeaway then was we're not talking about routine physical labor as the big the big delta here. It's about the massive increase in the automation of routine cognitive tasks. And what that means in our conclusion was it's coming for those jobs in the middle. It's coming for those jobs in offices. And we warned about that. We didn't say the sky was falling. We said, look, we're going to see continued job creation, especially in industries that are powered by technology. But if we don't do more to kind of mitigate the risks of dislocation, and we were saying this 6-7 years ago, we're going to see an economy that becomes more unequal. So I have the same concerns today, only they've grown in that particular way, where now the range of tasks that are automatable using AI has expanded. There are probably not necessarily a lot more risks for the most accessible jobs in our economy that was already highly automatable 7 years ago. But there's significantly more risk for some of the jobs that have become a reliable middle-class jobs in an era where more accessible middle jobs have dwindled, including manufacturing, which has been in decline for 7 decades now. So I do have a lot of concerns about this. But in some ways, I think the even bigger risk is that we're not creating anything close to the scale of the pathways into the good jobs that we are creating that we should be, right? Less so, I think, right now that we're seeing all these good jobs being destroyed, more so that we're just not building enough pathways into the good jobs that are being created. And we see that pretty clearly. I mean, I said something very positive at the beginning, that our tech workforce in New York City is more diverse than in the Bay Area, or really almost any other major city in the country. That's true, but at the same time, still about 3/4 of those technical jobs are held by men, and only about 20% or so are held by Black New Yorkers. We got to do a lot better. So one of the big takeaways I have, and this speaks to, I think, several points that have come up, including Aneto, your point about the users here, is we've got to look at the earliest years of a child's education and integrate the building blocks of computational thinking from the get-go. Because you're not going to train for an AI-powered economy focused on kind of the end of that process, layering on just a little bit of additional training on somebody that hasn't been given the tools to learn to solve problems computationally from the earliest years of their life. Now, we've made some big progress there. Computer Science for All in our schools has been a huge success. It's been almost a decade now, and we've gone from very little to a lot more. But still, a typical high school, maybe 20% or 25% of students even have access to, computer science in high school. That's a huge increase from where we were 10 years ago, but we've got a long way to go. How do we get to something close to universal computing education? Well, we've got to build it in from the beginning. So that's sort of one of my kind of key takeaways from the research that we've done there. And without getting too wonky, I would say that looks like training our teachers to integrate computational thinking into everything they do. You don't have a standalone computer science class for a first grader, but you make sure that their homeroom teacher is actually able to introduce those students to the building blocks of computing. You can do pattern recognition and algorithms even at recess by playing hopscotch, but you have to be able to teach teachers to do that. So that's one of the things that we need to do a lot more of, and I think better. At the same time, we've got a huge asset in New York City at the City University of New York, the 25 colleges that make up CUNY. CUNY, the number of students earning technology degrees has doubled over the past 5-6 years. That's a huge increase. And obviously, folks are looking out at the economy and they're seeing the opportunity there. But when it comes to ensuring that those students actually succeed in technology careers, we still have a long way to go. We've made some big improvements. Jonathan mentioned earlier the expansion of the CUNY 2X Tech program. It's really working, but it's often still happening at a really small scale. A few dozen students or a couple hundred students benefiting from the kinds of supports that really make a difference in getting paid work experience in not just the tech sector in general, but in AI in particular, and not just in tech, but AI-powered roles outside of the tech sector. We have to build off of these things that are working, but generally at a small scale, and make sure that we're enabling pathways into AI-powered jobs for a lot more New Yorkers, or folks are going to realize that the jobs that are left are at risk, and that's a real challenge we have today.
I want to quickly, Priya, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I'm going to shift to talk about compute next, just so I'll start thinking about compute.
Yeah, I think related to this piece, something that I think a lot about is if you know that there is a team that is going to have rapid implications because they need to have AI skills, instead of laying those people off, why wouldn't you work backwards to build a training program or an upskilling program to help support those individuals? And that same resourcing could go into net new skills development for job seekers that are looking to enter into these pathways. I know that there's a lot of work kind of happening in this kind of career pathways articulation, but I think it's an incredible opportunity as we think about how we keep our local workforce here. And I know you talked a lot about that kind of K through 12 space and then also our CUNY graduates, but I think a lot about how the role employers play in helping articulate what these skills actually are. And I do think particularly in non-technical roles, employers are struggling to really articulate what these skills are until it's a little bit too late, and it's much easier to make a rapid kind of decision around staffing. So I feel like this mapping piece is really, really key here and kind of building this bridge.
Winston, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think with education, because that's what is, so I'm actually, my other thing, I'm a trustee at Syracuse, so one of the questions is, how do you use AI for education today? And the truth is they don't know, right? Education is struggling, but the answer is you have to use it, and you have to actually integrate it quickly as a tool that when you're talking about training the teachers, also getting the AI to help. Like AI is the solution in many ways to training, to recognizing, working with kids with learning disabilities, working with kids with different languages. There is a lot of tech solution, an AI solution that would actually radically change education and allow for the advancement that we're talking about. But that's where, you have to change things, right? Because it's such a profound shift and it can be used for such a powerful good. It can do things so much faster and better, but we have to be willing to embrace it, because I actually think you're doing a disservice to kids if you don't do that. But education is going to be one of the great innovations of AI, but also one of the great fights. And so I think we have to recognize it and help New York actually be a leader in it and not be the resistor.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Go
Please.
ahead.
I just have this distinct memory of being in 7th grade, and you you're doing math, and they're like, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go, right? And then they're like, then I got to high school or maybe college, well, you're not going to have an encyclopedia in your pocket. We can just look anything up you want wherever you go, and I think to some degree here, we're rather, I think to your point in a way, rather than saying, well, hold on, ChatGPT is somehow a way to cheat on your homework. Yes. It's actually a tool to help you think. And it's you're not going to have, right now, I think we might believe that every high schooler isn't going to have a computer scientist in their pocket wherever they go. And I think that might be incorrect. I think the cost of actually writing code may approach zero. I was playing around with Replic's AI agents yesterday. I made an entire website functionally exactly what I needed in about 20 minutes using only natural language and a picture of the drawing that I wanted the website to look like. And this is just we're in inning 1 or something. So rather than I think actually the hardest part is that middle ground of everyone who's growing up with this stuff natively is going to be fine. It's happening so quickly, and if it happens as fast as driverless cars, and it slowly, and then all at once, presumably, then we have a big problem. Then it's the people who are currently in jobs. How do you transfer that? How do you get people up to speed on how to use this stuff? So I think it's actually really positive in the education sense.
Yeah.
I think it's very positive.
It's going to be a major culture change, right? Because you're going to have to convince the teachers, the drivers, whoever else. You've got people with vested interests, and I don't have the answer to how you do this because I agree with you. But how do you get then the entire teaching workforce in New York City and every public school system to see that it's not a threat to their jobs? They need to learn new things. It's a very complicated process to get it in the hands in the near term. So how, ideas about how to do that, I think, would be as much what needs to be done, but the how it can be done, I think is really critical.
Well, I think we all saw that play out, right? I think everyone here probably remembers, but New York City Public Schools, our Department of Education, at first, when ChatGPT, this was maybe 6 months ago, kind of first was getting very, very popular, the mainstream, they banned it, and then they unbanned it because it was pretty clear, you're not, when you think about preparing kids, you have to prepare them to live in a world where these tools are prevalent. And saying you can't use this because we're afraid of cheating, but then all of a sudden you graduate and where are you?
Right.
So I heard AI described to me for the workforce in 3 ways. It's a loom, a slide rule, or a crane. And I always thought this was interesting. The loom displaces the job, right? Like you used to knit, now you don't have a job. The crane, the slide rule enhances your ability, right? Like it gives you the ability to computational power. The crane gives you superpowers, right? Now a human can lift a block of concrete. AI is clearly going to have some looms, but you hope that there's new jobs that get created. But the focus for education, for workforce, doesn't matter, for marketing, for real estate, finance, is how is it a slide rule or a crane? And I actually think in education it's a crane. It could be transformative, but it is going to require, that's where I think it's the education of getting the teachers, getting the administration to understand that it gives you superpowers. But if they don't change, the change is being thrust on them. That's the one thing. This isn't something that can be ignored. Bureaucracy will not be able to resist the power of AI to transform society. That's actually very clear. You saw what literally, if you're banning something, unbanning it. So if you fast forward in 3 years, it will progress past anything bureaucracy or government can control if it doesn't get on board. And I know that's a really hard concept for government to think, or for institutions to think, but that's the reality of the pace of change and transformation that we're in today. So use it in a good way to be the slide rule or the crane versus resisting it.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that and share some other frameworks that have been helpful for me when I'm trying to get people to embrace it. I think one is just thinking about and this is not from me, this is from David Rubenstein, like the scales of history. There's, the mobile phone, like that was a huge change in society. You would argue someone who has a mobile phone is typically better off than someone who doesn't have a mobile phone. The internet, someone who has the internet is typically better off than someone who doesn't have the internet. So when you explain to someone like, hey, this is like that, like this version of AI, it's not something to be afraid of, it's not something to ignore, like you can't ignore it. This is going to make you better off. Another framework is you can either use AI to 10x your outputs, so to get strong, or you can use it to get skinny, which is to get the same output with 1/10 the people, which is the job loss we're talking about. And so when you evaluate like every new tool or product in that lens, like how can I use this to be strong, like 10x? Coming back to education, maybe it's like making my lesson plan, maybe it's like evaluating essays, like all these things that take a lot of time. This is actually a very good use case with the tools that are freely available today, is what I would say. So I think not just in business, and one other, I think Mark Cuban says this, there's 2 types of companies, those that are great at AI and everyone else. I would say the same thing about individuals. So whether you're in the arts, like it's not something that's happening over there, you should be harnessing it too.
Tech NYC has recently launched a project called Decoded Futures. We're working with nonprofits across the city to help build AI capacity, and there's so much appetite. And it's really just, so far, we're in the early stages, but we've created these spaces and these kind of workshops. And once it's so much about, we talked about this demystification, it's so much about putting the tools in people's hands. And Matt, to your point about your experience yesterday, once the tools are in your hand and you see them, people are incredibly creative. Humans, New Yorkers, are so creative and so imaginative, and it's just getting over that hump. And so I think, another idea that I've been thinking a lot about vis-a-vis government, about getting over that hump is Anita, you were talking about this idea of like government helping push people to use the tools. I think it's also, though, about getting specific. Winston, I think you're right about the big things. Government has to get the big things right, obviously. But it's also, it's not like just go use AI. You know, the state has a pilot where they're helping people file their state taxes. And it's going incredibly well, but I don't think most people realize it. And it's like putting the tools in people's hands, making a single function work better without screaming AI. But if the city or state starts doing business with the city or state, when you go to the DMV, like making these interactions with local government go more smoothly, I think that would go a long way.
So what you're talking about is something incremental and specific, right? It's solving a specific problem, which is it takes X hours to do your taxes. Now we're going to do it X minus Y to do your taxes.
And as a New Yorker, you understand that because it's applied to your life specifically.
But you're solving a problem for
You're solving a
somebody.
problem.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's it. It's not just a tool that's going to put,
Right.
10 out of 11 people out of work. It is, I'm going to solve this specific problem. And I think that's a lot of the resistance that you're going to see from individuals is the leading with, because this is a very Silicon Valley approach, is where can I invest? Because where can I put people out of business, right? Where can I reduce and increase productivity and efficiency? That is going to meet with tremendous resistance in a lot of different areas because people are people. They have their job and they're 10 years from retirement. They don't want to do something new. So I think if we're going to get it in the hands, it has to be incremental and it has to solve one of their daily problems, not an academic problem.
Matt, you.
Yeah, can I just, I think, I agree with you. Like, in terms of getting one user to do one thing, I do think that in addition to the incremental problem, at the beginning, at the outset, they were talking about how, could AI solve housing? And I'm like, okay, how's AI going to solve housing? And then I'm thinking to myself, well, hold on. Waymo now is going to, the cost of coding is going to come down to zero. Cost of taking a ride, Uber's like expensive to take it from point A to point B in a congested city, right? Now imagine that price goes down to zero. So now, where are my parking garage? Let's say you still need to have a car. Some people have cars, right? So now my parking spot, where is that going to be located? Could it be located somewhere else? If I can spin up an instance of getting to the car for zero price, where the car, and then I'm thinking, okay, well, what's the number one, I don't know if this is number one thing, the number one request in the context of the city of yes is being able to build buildings without parking requirements. So yes, this is not an incremental change, but I think saying, hold on, just because it has the word AI doesn't mean it's sort of good or bad, but what does it mean? If you let some of these dominoes play out, actually you could imagine a world where having AI-powered cars ends up meaning you have a more affordable city.
So Matt, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, if you don't mind. How many companies in your, and you can talk about you specifically or just the VC community in general, where an entrepreneur comes in and says to you, I'm building a company and my main customer is municipal government?
Oh no! How many of them say
how
that?
many? Yeah, well, how
or
many?
how many do we invest in?
Yeah, how many do? No. Let's do both. Yeah. So how many? And I'm leaving the Department of Defense aside because they obviously have a big, but municipal government.
Yeah. So
I want to sell to the water people. I want to sell to the subway system. I want to sell to the Department of Education.
Some sewer system. Apparently, there's a bunch of. We don't do this, but it's very. I think it's a specialty within venture capital is to be able to invest. I think that's a. What is your point?
Yeah.
I have
My point is that's not where the money is going, right? There's not big dollars going to fund.
Oh, but the dollars in Waymo are real, right?
But Waymo is not being sold to government. Government has to approve it, but government is not the customer.
But that's my point, is that we can solve, in my imaginary world, right? Waymo goes a long way to reducing the amount of cars that are on the street, which does solve a problem for government. For us as a community, whether it's within government or not. But I agree with you that there's not, I don't know a lot of...
That's one company.
I know one company. I have a friend who started a business in New Orleans where the city government down there basically took all of their data and they've given it to him to literally put into data warehouses every customer interaction that the citizens have with the agencies to then create a tool that will allow both the citizens and the workers to have effective communication and problem solving, basically using AI as a solution. So not to put the people out of work, but to actually get to much better solutions for the city government. They almost did it from desperation.
No, and those are excellent examples.
Right.
My only point is, we need
Right.
more of that.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
I asked
They
you
did
that
it from
question before,
desperation.
Selling
about
to
how does
gov-
it,
the
like,
real-
how do you solve,
Right.
how does the tech sector solve housing?
Right.
We need more conversations like that.
Yeah.
Right.
And more interactions, because like your ideas that were coming off that were great.
But that took the government opening up their data. My example is desperation of.
Government, I'm saying government needs to have a
Right.
role at the table, but it needs to be a collaboration, right?
wanna
It can't
talk-
just be, you drop things in.
I do want to talk a little bit more, we're going to run out of time, about other places where government can play a role, has played a role, might play more of a role. I want to quickly make sure we spend a couple minutes talking about compute and the cost of compute. And Matt, I'm going to start with you because you see a lot of startups. How much of a barrier is that? I know, Eli, one of the ideas in the report is that government could help subsidize the cost of compute for startups. So I just kind of want to spend a couple minutes hashing through that.
Yeah, I'll try to do it quickly. For some, particularly companies that are training their own models, it's a material cost. Compute's like where a lot of the venture dollars are going. Even with inference, compute's an important cost. You all know more about exactly what the goals are, but to me, the goal of subsidizing compute, the reason it's expensive is because it's a limited resource. And I think it would depend on what the goal of the city or the state was. If the goal is to find companies that are already getting funded and to say, like what Paris does, is say, look, if you raise this amount of money, we'll give you this more, so you get some leverage and that you'll build your company in Paris, you have positive selection there. I think alternatively, if you're saying, I'm going to give money to companies that aren't able to raise venture capital dollars, let's say, and those companies are going to get compute. If the goal is downstream jobs from the companies those create, do you then have adverse selection? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. And then more broadly, I think about like, if we gave away cloud, like the cloud's like some server in Iowa that you upload your file to and it stays there and it gets, and compute to me is kind of like that. Like I don't really care where the compute happens. Mm-hmm. So I don't have I think whereas the data, like New York City like has a monopoly on this data and could open it up and help people train models and have, instead of procurement for a year-long contract, what if it was streaming procurement? Every quarter there's a test, and if the model that came out is better than your model, you get fired, and we pick that company, and like you can just do hot swapping of that. So I don't know. That was my sense.
Yeah, I could quickly just say two sentences about Empire AI, the state project, which is like up and running in its earliest phases and is going incredibly well, and that's where the state is building compute for research institutions, and they turned it on about 2 weeks ago, and it's like there's a wait list already, and there's all these projects, and people are just dying to get on this. And we're building it in Buffalo, and that's great. But you're right; it in theory could be in Iowa. Don't tell the governor I said that. But it's who has access to it.
It's like kind of like a telescope.
Yeah, it's who has access.
I think about it like kind of like a telescope.
Well, that is actually, I will tell you, that is a lot of the model for how we're building. How Empire AI works is looking at academic telescopes, or just telescopes, and how you share access to a limited resource. That's right.
So I don't think that should be open to startups unless you're solving a government problem. That'd be the only class I might say, because otherwise there's so much money in AI. The public sector does not need to subsidize that.
Yeah.
The exception would be you're solving a government problem. You get access.
I would just add, I think yes, solving government problems, certainly using something like Empire AI, that's the whole idea, right? I would just say I think there is some potential value in the city thinking about with its economic development dollars focused on spurring the economy here, to think about where they can maybe level the playing field a little bit. There are startups that are not in a good position, startups potentially that are run by founders of color, or startups that are run by women, or startups that have struggled generally to gain access to capital. So there might be a play there that involves where the city's already thinking about some things, the Founders Fund program through NYCDC, for example. Think about where they could potentially play to AI and look at some opportunities to sort of democratize access to compute. I think that's something the city, it's consistent with what EC's been doing, but it's an opportunity there as well to help some of those smaller startups. And I was inspired by something Matt said when we talked about what Hugging Face has done. Hugging Face as a platform for builders to build AI tools and services. And they offered $10 million of free compute to help folks kind of get onto the platform and build there. So I think there's something potentially useful for the city to consider in that way, to certainly say that's not let startups access Empire AI, but to think about are there some ways that the city could help to facilitate access to compute for small startups, new startups, startups that have historically struggled to access capital to be able to compete.
I would also say there's a sprint there because, eventually the cost of compute will inevitably come down, Matt, like you're saying, but I don't know, the CHIPS Act, if we're still going to have it, I don't know. We'll see. I don't know what I will not make a prediction on what that timeline looks like.
Can I ask you a question about this?
Yeah.
To what degree are we giving people compute versus just giving people money to turn into compute if they want to buy the compute?
Well, I think you can make an argument either way. I think I can talk quickly about how, from an Empire AI perspective, we think it's important that it's an independent, that we're building the compute for the research institutions. But that, and this is, Maria, I think you and I probably agree on this, it's not for the commercial
No,
sector.
That's
That
like
is
a
re-
core research facility.
That's right.
That's going to be shared by academics.
And it's really about thinking about incentive structure. And if someone is an academic or a researcher, their incentive structure is inherently different. They've made that choice in life, so you want to give them the ability to have access to the kind of compute that now the private sector has access to, and that too is an economic development tool. Obviously there's all kinds of startups that have spun out over time from, see Stanford, right? And that's that is the main goal, as I see it, for Empire AI is not that we're spinning off 1 million startups, and it's really about the research.
Yeah.
But that will hopefully be.
And Julie, I'm sure that it was to solve the problem that every academic institution in New York State was going to Albany saying, we need money for compute. And Albany said, listen, let's be efficient about this. Let's create one center. So that's a separate thing.
Well, it's creating scale. I mean, and that's what I think, Eli, to your point, as you think about what startups need, it's about creating scale. And I think just to drill down, in the market for compute, scale is key. You cannot purchase against the largest companies. The amount of resources they have is how you think about building scale. So I think there's something there in that nugget. So I think that's a really important piece. There's so many other things I want to talk about. I'm looking at the clock. We only have 10 minutes left before we open it up for questions. So I want to, we talked a lot about data at the beginning, but it keeps coming up throughout the course of this conversation as a kind of in New York, again, a unique attribute of New York, something that New York can really capitalize on. So I want to start, Priya and Nito, with you two. We're building companies in this space. What would that look like? Like what access to structured data from, let's say, the city? What would you be looking for? What would sound great to you?
I think something that's really crucial from thinking about workforce development systems is how people are actually accessing services and real kind of user data on how human beings are accessing that data. And I think about a lot of the investments that you're making around how public policy problems are being solved, because a lot of what we're doing is training our models on how people are looking for work, what their skills and experiences are. So I think deep in an understanding of that kind of data is really meaningful to us, because then I think those data sets are really going to vary based on the problems that each of our organizations are looking to solve. I think using that data to make more informed decisions around the types of solutions we're building, I think is really, really key.
Yeah, so I think I can answer from the lens of what our company does.
Yeah.
So we help all these consumer brands do one-to-one personalized conversations with their customers. So that could be a one-to-one email, one-to-one SMS, one-to-one on social media. And the reason why these brands want to do this is they want to stand out, they want to grow. Everyone's kind of getting the same emails, but a very personalized email that you get from a brand like, oh, let me take a look, let me see what their products are. So I think that's one side of the data, is there's a lot of conversations that happen with government, whether those are in-person conversations, emails, forms you fill. That could be very interesting, obviously anonymized, to help build out like conversations, because a lot of these chatbot companies are trying to build better and better conversations. So that's like one aspect of data that I think could be very interesting. Another is like the outcomes. So the reason why these companies, work with us to have these personalized conversations, they want to drive more revenue, they want to have more conversions, they want to have more followers. They care about the outcome. And so we use that outcome data to improve the conversations, because when we have this type of conversation with a customer, they end up purchasing the product. So when you bring it back to a city context, like what is the outcome? Maybe someone applying for something from the government and then they actually got approved. Oh, okay, what were the inputs that led to that? So releasing, again, anonymized in like the right way, information about like, here's the outcome that these kind of applications or forms or conversations are getting, and here's the conversation that's leading to that. Those are very interesting for other companies to build off of, then can be applied to other industries.
So one of the things that's interesting about data, and two things I guess, the non-AI person, but the way I look at it is, first off, you have to have structured data, which means an Excel file is not structured data. right? You actually have to have data in a format that is consumable by AI. But what gets really interesting is when you have multiple sets of structured data. AI is a pattern recognition. At the heart of AI, in many ways, is what does it do? Is it can see things we can't see. It's smarter than us, basically. And so what gets really exciting about data and how it gets used is getting it structured first and then combining multiple sets of data that seemingly might be unrelated, but that are connected, in this case, to our business. And then asking AI to find solutions or patterns that we didn't necessarily see. And that's when that's when it gets really, really interesting. So, because there's all again, that's why I say the big stuff. Just get the data structured. Then let people have access to it and have really broad access to it. Let them there's multiple types of micro solutions that will come, but there's so much information that we will glean when something that has an ability to see things we can't actually is overlaid and ask questions. That's the way I think of it. I mean, it's very simple, actually. That's why AI excites me, because it can actually, I mean, just ask ChatGPT some complex question. 10 seconds later, 5 seconds later, you're getting it. It's because it's accessing data and it's pulling information at a speed that we can't, and it gives output. So supercharge that.
You know, one thing that had me thinking too, that is, I think when we talk about education and what we can do in the education space and what we can do for New Yorkers, is just giving people space to play with the tools.
Right.
I think I kind of was an early adopter on some, like, I'm not going to give my age away on internet stuff, because I was I was in a high school and I had a dial-up modem and I had time. I do not have as much time to play with the AI tools as I would like, because I just have less free time, and creating structured time for people to screw around with them, I think would be really important. I want to quickly, we only have 5 minutes before we open up to questions. I want to quickly talk about some of the challenges, and I don't want to end on a negative note, but this has been a really positive conversation, and we've talked about so much of the promise of New York. We did talk about some of the challenges with hiring and education, and we've talked about some of the challenges that government innately has, but I think it's fair to say that this group feels optimistic and feels like this is a really amazing moment to be thinking about these things, and it's an amazing moment for New York. But there are some challenges. We started, Winston, you were in LA and you saw all these technologies on the street that we don't see here yet. We've got a lot of legislators circling around, coming up with ideas, some of which I think are really probably could be problematic. And we'd much rather see this stuff happen in DC and not some kind of patchwork of regulation where New York is different than other places. So I kind of want to throw this out. When you all think of what some of the challenges are, because I think a lot of people in this room, these are things we could work on together to overcome some of those challenges. So I'm just there's a question in there, implicit somehow, but I would love you all to react to that, and we could go from there.
Well, I think one of those things plays to one of the things that government needs to do more of, which is, there's a huge risk around building AI-powered tools with bias baked into them. And it's a global challenge. We can't solve for that challenge just at the municipal level with regulation alone. I think one of the solutions there is doubling down on everything the city needs to be doing to build pathways into AI-powered careers so that the folks that are building those tools look like New York City. It's not the only solution, but it's maybe the most important thing the city needs to be doing to confront that particular challenge. And we've got a lot of work to do there. We're not building tools. The people that are building those tools now globally don't look like they're citizens, and certainly that's true here in New York City. So, but there's solutions there. We know some of the things that are working, from K through 12 to adult workforce education to CUNY. We need to double down on all of those things so that our workforce looks like New York City. That's going to help. It's not going to solve it, but it's going to help. The other thing I would say is, when you look at kind of the risk of dislocation, we wrote about this 7 years ago, but we need an AI preparation plan in New York City. I mean, we need to get ahead of some of these challenges, identifying those key industries and occupations that are most at risk. I think, to Priya's point, other folks have brought this up. I think in many cases, it's really looking at and Matt brought this up in a powerful way, you know, you're looking at a generation right now, the folks that are in the workplace, who are going to be under the most pressure from you know, technology that they don't really understand, that they're fearful of, in government and in the private sector. Having a plan in place to help folks become equipped to integrate the benefits of AI into their day-to-day tasks is hugely important. But generally, and this is maybe an oversimplification, our workforce development system hasn't historically been focused on incumbent worker training the same way that we focus on for serving folks that are unemployed or underemployed. We need to do that better as well, and AI can help. But we need to do a lot more to help folks that are in the workforce right now, and that's a big challenge that I see. The other thing I'd just say really quickly is, you know, there's a solution here for one of the problems that we've been talking about. Folks are burnt out on many parts of their jobs that AI is actually well positioned to do for them, you know? And so I'm sorry to be so optimistic. I know there's some big challenges here, but like one of those things that we published a report a little while ago looking at the challenges in the human services sector. We showed that there's a 15% vacancy rate, you know, across the nonprofit human services sector. And in some occupations and industries, it's like 50%. But one of the things, the big takeaway was folks need to get paid better. But one of the other things that people really struggle with is the bureaucracy of those jobs. They are so burnt out on the amount of data entry that those jobs still require in 2024. You know, and there's big opportunities that we miss sometimes, where the city realized we had a backlog of like 50,000 people waiting for access to benefits just to be enrolled, right? The solution now was to hire 1,000 people to speed that process up. That shouldn't be the solution in 2024. Now, I want those 1,000 people to have jobs, but it shouldn't be just doing that kind of data matching. Folks that want to work with people should be working with people in face-to-face roles. We could have more people doing the parts of their jobs that they're good at and that they care about, and actually have a more efficient set of providers and systems as well. So a couple quick thoughts.
Yeah.
Privacy. I'm just concerned about privacy. Like all this data, I think it's gonna be amazing to have the data out there, and it'll be good. We have to be very proactive about thinking about once it's out of the box, you can't kind of put it back in.
Yeah, and maybe somewhere in between this, I think there's a lot of fear because people are worried about privacy, and because they don't really know the ins and outs, there needs to be a little bit of an explanation of how is their job being made easier, and how is the information of the communities that they're supporting, how is their information being made private. And I think related to the point that you just made, a lot of what we have to talk about when we talk with government partners is the fear around people losing their jobs because AI is going to automate everything. And at the end of the day, AI is not going to automate the work of the best career coach you have, who is so good on working individually with people and why people engage with public services. So that's a really big piece of this as well, is how we show that kind of share in relationship of this is what humans do really, really well. Here's what AI can't do. And I think a lot about, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a professor who, I asked him, are you worried about your students using AI? And he's like, an AI will make an F student a D student, but it won't make an A student. And I think that's really important, sort of thinking about how we think about solutioning in this space.
And the reason why privacy is so important is because it's a very powerful tool for bad actors who can then use that data to do very bad things.
I'm supposed to say a challenge?
You don't have to. It wasn't required.
I'm too optimistic.
Yeah, I love that answer.
I guess I'd say when we speak about AI, I think that probably, at least in my mind, a term that we haven't really said is robotics. And I think AI and robotics are connected. So I do worry about it's job loss, not just of AI, but it's job loss of functionality also in robotics. And I think that we have to really think, I am scared about the social fabric of New York, because that type of job displacement leads to significant frustration. And so having policies that retrain people or help people thrive, because the disruption is real. The robots, the AI, whatever you want to call it, it's exciting, it's awesome, but it's going to lead to a group of people who have a significant dissatisfaction with the way the system is working. And I think we see how that plays out on a national level. So I think New York has to get in front of that and think about doing it in a way that actually doesn't lead to that sort of almost guttural frustration that exists with the system.
I mean,
Sorry to be so negative.
No, I mean, and we went over, so normally I would ask now the positive question, but I don't want to get in trouble because there's going to be audience questions. But I do want to say, I think that, first of all, it's been a really great conversation. I think we could have gone double the time. There's so much to tease out here, and I can't wait to read the entire report tomorrow. But it's clear that we all see a lot of opportunity, and we feel like, I personally speak for myself, but I think we all agree that New York is really well positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. And while, of course, there are some challenges, that's why we all do the hard work and roll up our sleeves and try and get it done. So I just feel really optimistic, and so many thoughtful people like you all in New York working on these things just makes me feel really even more optimistic. Okay, now we've got some mics and some questions. Am I to call? We'll start here.
So thank you all for sharing your insights. My name is Jose Garcia. I'm with Angel Hack and a startup advisor. So I'm just curious, we hear about AI, but we're not hearing about the other growth industries, specifically the life sciences, which New York City is trying to be the healthcare leader. Because let's face it, if you're out of Manhattan, you're out of luck in the hospital system. Or climate change, we have the offshore wind turbines, and that's another area that needs a lot of workers that need training opportunities. What are we doing? Because AI can enable that stuff, but those are other areas that, quite frankly, need even more attention. Nurses are burned out; they're working double time in some cases.
I think you didn't hear about it because the panel is on AI. So there is a tremendous amount.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. And there is $1.5 billion that the city and state have put on the table to support the growth of life sciences. There's huge investments that are being made, both private sector and public sector, in the green economy, specifically along the Brooklyn waterfront. So we'd be happy to come back and have a second conversation about life sciences and climate change. And you're right that AI is going to be a tool that will be very interesting in how it helps advance those two fields.
It should help actually get back to those pattern recognition. It actually should help us prioritize how we spend money. It should help the advancement of research. I mean, when they talk about curing cancer, they really do believe that by 2030, they will cure cancer because of AI, right? It's just a system overlaying a set of data and being able to do advanced calculation and computation to come up with something that we weren't capable of. So life sciences, all of these things are going to be radically transformed. Everything, I would argue, that every business today, every agency should start with its tech. It's a tech agency that does something, right? Like, you must be a tech-first company or tech-first agency around your specialty. So climate doesn't make a difference really what it is. Start with that you have to become a tech company today or a tech-focused business.
Oh, right here, I saw a hand. I think, wait for the mic, please.
Thank you very much. It's a little dizzying, the panel that we've had today. It's a lot to digest. Good morning. My name's Ken Brown. I'm the district manager of Bronx Community Board 5, which is a profoundly under-resourced and underserved community. So there's a number of provocative issues, I think, related to this for the people I serve. One is, how do we get people that are overwhelmed and under-resourced in terms of education, both academic and technical, into the pathway into decent, sustainable jobs while managing all the difficulties of living in the kind of community I represent? That's one thing. The other thing is, one of the things that I found very provocative in what Winston said is one of the uses of AI is creating, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use the word synergy, between different data pools and things like that, and kind of cultural acclamation. And I was thinking, well, that'd be a great job. I would love to do something like that. And it seems to me, and I'm profoundly ignorant around this issue, if we invested more in people and bringing people into these systems, it would obviate or preclude the need for AI. If we had more people that were from different cultures that were coming together to talk about how things can come together and synergies and things like that, that would take away the need for AI, because I see AI, and this is Luddite of me, as a job displacer. In the community that I represent, this is a tremendous fear because we see it every day, and that's the reality.
Yeah, Dawn said people use AI. It's people who use it. If anyone wants to respond to that.
but here's what came to my mind, and I don't know if this answers your question or if this is maybe an example of how people use AI. So I was on Community Board 5, and one of the things we had to do was, in Manhattan, and one of the things I had to do was you had to go post notices everywhere whenever there's a new restaurant or something that's going to come up, and you got to make sure you got to go to all the buildings that have residential, because you got to get their community feedback. What are the ways, and again, this is more maybe an example of how AI can take away some of the, can give leverage as opposed to remove a job, is we made this interactive map that was, all it did was like highlight in blue all the residential buildings, which is because of open data, we had easy access to, right? It was a quick project. And then can go to the specific buildings, post in front of the specific buildings that we know have residential. I could imagine a world where you can, first of all, even build that, but where one can build that, where one can start to tie, as you were talking about, these different data points together to do some of the work of getting community feedback on different items. How many community boards are in compliance with the rule that says you have to keep all of your meeting minutes and post everything publicly? You are? No, thank you. I go to my community board's now I'm in Brooklyn, my community board's website, and I run the entire Zoom through Claude, which is like ChatGPT, and I say, create meeting minutes, help me understand what happened in this event, because they don't do it yet. So my hope is that AI can provide leverage so that we can have more of those, so that those people touch points are that much more valuable, and they're at that level. They're not like, hey, where do I find the meeting minutes? They're like, hey, I saw that you guys talked about this. I'd love to submit a comment for next time because I saw this is going to be on the agenda, because it's automatically getting sent to me. That's my hope of the role AI would play.
Yeah. So I just want to address, AI as a job displacer versus a job creator, because as I mentioned, one of the missions of our company is actually to use AI to create jobs. So let me talk about how does that actually happen? So the majority of people who work on our platform are women, and a lot of them are stay-at-home parents or caregivers, not by design. We didn't target women. I think it's just the nature of the companies we serve. We serve a lot of fashion companies, beauty companies, and that's interesting for people. And so what's the use case? Most people are using social media, things like Instagram, TikTok, and that's actually where we help these brands as well. We're helping them engage people on Instagram or on TikTok. It's something almost anyone who's used Instagram or TikTok can do. But we pay them to do that on our platform. We're basically paying them to use Instagram. We're paying them to use TikTok. So when you explain that to someone like, hey, do you like using that? Okay, you can work on this platform and make money. That's like a no-brainer. And work from home anytime you want. That's why we're attracting that type of people. So, we're growing. We're trying to become a bigger and bigger company to create more of those type of opportunities. But we're not the only one. There are many platforms like this where you can basically do what you do every day online, and you make money doing that. Like I talked about my mom. She's a professor of history. She's retired. She likes talking about history. She likes reading history. And she's getting paid basically to tell the AI that it's wrong, which is basically what the job is on our platform too. And in a way, you're feeding it, you're building it, but that's a way to create money. I think when you think about AI, I can help you save time, which is like the summarization. I think you talked about that use case, or it can help you get promoted and make more money. When you explain it to people like that, it's not something to be afraid of. It's something for you to harness, because you got to get to it before other people get to it.
Yeah, and maybe there's something around, I think that because we've kind of covered so many topics, there's sort of the tools which AI uses and the application of AI, and something that we think about is using AI to help get more information into the hands of individuals who are being completely left out of specific economies. Can they upload their resume and start getting mapped to skills and experiences that will allow them to make a transition into an industry they may have never known about before and didn't even know they had an aptitude or understanding for, and then learn about training programs where they live that would help them make a transition. So that's an AI-powered tool that doesn't require someone who needs to have a grasp of AI, but can still allow them to be able to access resources they would have otherwise not have been able to. When we think about a city like New York City, right? Most of us are stuck in our neighborhoods, right? Every nonprofit says that they're the best kept secret wherever they live, right? So how can AI be a tool that unifies and connects people in a thoughtful way? So I think each of us has kind of talked about that in a different piece, and I think that's what's really dizzying for folks is what is AI and what is the tool and what is the application and how does it actually benefit me and affect my life?
So to answer what you were saying, and I think I look at AI as it has democratized knowledge, right? And it's now democratizing services, the ability to create things. What that also means now for low-income neighborhoods is there is a tool that if we can get it into the hands of the citizens in those neighborhoods, they have an opportunity to get knowledge, wealth. It's now democratizing wealth creation, right? Which is a powerful way to think about it. So what is the way? Because every one of the people in your community needs to be trained. The city needs to introduce them to, call it ChatGPT AI, and get them proficient enough, prompt engineering, that they can figure out, like, I can ask it a question, I can do this, I can create a business, I can create a website, I can do anything. That actually that is probably one of the most powerful things that the city could do for low-income neighborhoods, is a relentless focus on getting people to learn, to getting access to it on a regular basis and learning how to use it. Then they will have the power in their hands to almost compete against anybody else. And it's just that simple, right? Get it in the hands of every citizen in New York, give them basic training, and then let them flourish.
We're gonna go over here, but I just want to say one quick thing too that keeps coming up, and something I firmly believe that is so important to get the specific use cases, and it's so important to show people that it's not just this big amorphous AI cloud that's coming for us, but it's this thing that it's going to help with. It's that thing that it's going to make it easier to interact with this city agency. It's going to make it easier to do something at your library. I think it's on all of us, especially on city government, to get hyper specific. Okay, we've got 2 questions over here, actually.
Hey, y'all. I'm Anya. I work for Councilmember Gutierrez, who's also the chair of the tech committee. About 2 weeks ago, she held a hearing that was about AI in government, and it was reviewing OTI's AI action plan. One of the things that became very clear during that is that it's a great plan. They have a lot of different thoughts. They have a lot of recommendations, but there's going to be zero enforcement in the near future. And so I'm curious what you guys think the role of auditing, of upskilling, plays within, as we're like putting these ideas and putting these systems in place, and like what we can learn from private sector.
Does anyone? I think that's a great question. I think that I feel really optimistic about government use of AI, but there's obviously a lot of risk involved. So
Can I wonder, when you say auditing, what do you mean?
Yeah.
You mean auditing the use of AI by the private sector, or auditing, what do you?
The use of, so this is specifically about how agencies, which they refer to as the customers, which I also think is an issue because people are
confusing. Yeah.
how agencies, each agency is going to use AI products, and if there will be any auditing. Right now, OTI, which is Office of Innovation Technology, says that they are giving recommendations, but they will not be doing any enforcement of those recommendations, and they will not be doing any auditing of those recommendations. While we also know that there's no like upskilling involved, we know what the workforce looks like, we know there's vacancies, et cetera. So I'm curious of like what, not auditing of private sector, but auditing itself.
Got it. Okay.
And you're asking kind of what's the private sector mirror to that in some ways?
Sure, like what are the best practices?
Yeah.
Like, how are you doing QA?
I mean, the only example I think of is there are a bunch of companies that have said it's the CEOs, so it's functions a little bit differently. They say, look, every single functional head needs to answer the question, how will AI affect our business? How can we use AI for our business? And I would imagine, although I'm not sitting in the companies, that someone is required to like come back and say what the answer to that question is. It sounds like maybe just the first part's happening here. But that's, and sometimes I think to your use case point, I don't think we know the use cases yet. We're all trying to figure it out, and what's really exciting about it is that human beings get to pick the use cases. Like whatever your particular job is, you are the expert about what is hard about your job and what you might be able to use AI for. So that's the exciting part, but that's kind of why the CEOs have to ask their subordinates and can't just say, oh, we're gonna use AI for this because I understand your job better than you do.
But doesn't that present some, I think, Anya, to your point, this presents some specific and unique challenges, especially city government right now. In any given agency, how many people can answer those questions? How many people have, the time to answer those questions? I think it's really important that government adopt tools that make government more effective and efficient for New Yorkers. But how we get from A to B isn't as easy as a lot of people in the private sector would like to think it is.
So, and I think it's less right now to the point about people, even the private sector doesn't really understand all the use cases, so less about auditing and more maybe about a centralized set of resources that can be the go-to place for each of the agencies to do the work around figuring out how it can be used, so that You don't have to replicate that expertise across each agency, but that OTI becomes almost like an AI SWAT team, if you will, that can be, their job is to be up on what's happening, what are the tools, what are the use cases that are out there potentially for government and we could bring into government, and then helping to disseminate that knowledge and being a center of expertise for the rest of city government.
And go ahead, Jen.
I just want to say that I think we're at a really important moment here, and in the state, there's some pending legislation on government usage in AI. You're seeing this at city, state levels all over the country. I really hope that we do not implement laws that are very hard to change, that make it really hard, as these technologies are rapidly evolving, and laws do not rapidly evolve. And it is really important that as a society, we create a set of rules, like small R rules, that allow government to take advantage of technology to make government work better.
I just want to quickly add one idea for where government could maybe help with this. It's in our report, but it's the idea of creating an NYC AI service corps. Kind of modeled on like an AmeriCorps type program. We have, something similar already in city government, not at all focused on technology. You'd need to resource it a little bit better. It's got to pay a little better, not a lot better necessarily, to be on par with just like a postdoctoral fellowship, But the idea there would be, let's actually encourage folks with AI expertise. Maybe they've just finished a PhD program, maybe they're super early stage, in their careers, to embed in government agencies for 6 months, And I would say the biggest opportunity would actually be to help develop those use cases. I'm not saying the idea is this person builds all the tools and deploys them and has them at the scale of New York City overnight, but to just help those folks in those agencies think about what's the opportunity here? How do we do this? I think we're not yet at the point where, we have something to audit, but we need to help folks actually figure out what problems are we solving and how could we do it? So that's one idea. And I think we could potentially attract a lot of folks, really talented folks from here in New York City and from all over the world to say, that's exciting. I'd love to come and figure out what kind of problems can I solve in the biggest, city in North America.
Mm-hmm. So, but I actually think the framing of how can we use AI is too broad of a question. We're actually seeing AI coming into government by coming at it from the other direction, which is, this is the problem we have, we want a solution. And because AI is such a big tool now that everybody's using, we're actually getting AI-driven companies coming in using AI, but they're coming in under, how can we take all of the video footage that they collect every day going through the sewers to look for cracks, and there's now a tool that uses AI to look at the cracks in a very fast, more automated fashion, so you don't have somebody sitting there looking at videos. So that's an example of AI coming into government, but it's not like, what can AI do for us? It is, here are our problems. Let's see what the solutions are. Some have AI and some don't have AI. But I think that is really the way to start to get AI into government, is start with the problems and not just this general tool.
Yeah. And I think maybe one of the challenges is that there are so many tools. And I think there's a kind of like decision paralysis that's also happening, where I think a service corps or an organization or a set of people that are here to vet these solutions could be really meaningful, because there's not just going to be one platform or one tool that does everything. It's going to be many different solutions that have to come together efficiently for some of these use cases as well.
So I saw I'm on the board of the Port Authority, and I was actually just seeing a case where trains can go through cameras. They use AI technology in an inspection that would have taken hours, they can do in literally minutes today.
That came through the Transit Tech Lab.
Right. So you had a problem, right? In this case, a train is being inspected. They had a solution. That's AI, right? It is literally multi-camera, and you imagine the efficiency that gets picked up. It doesn't really displace jobs, so to speak. In fact, it increases productivity and safety and outcome. And so that was a great example of an AI solution for a government, in this case, inspection. And imagine you amplify that across every place today, and you'd have massive efficiency and improvement for services for constituents.
I think we only have time for one more. We have so many hands. This is really hard. Let's go right here, and I'm sorry. We had right here in front.
So I'm Hojin. Thanks for the valuable insights today. And I'm with a startup trying to solve the problem of hiring for blue-collar jobs. And our ultimate long-term goal is to help immigrants and elders who are not tech-savvy, and also disabled people find a job easily, better in the future. So how can my startup partner with the city to help job seeker have a hope in finding a job better in the future using AI and technology?
I ask myself that question every day. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, I'm not going to give you an answer that's a solution, but I do think it's an incredible opportunity, especially recognizing that the communities that you're hoping to serve are not a monolith, right? They're all going to need different levels of solutions. So I think there's a real opportunity to think about not only government, but also the nonprofit organizations who support these organizations. I think those are organizations that don't often get the resources to actually implement these tools. So maybe one recommendation is to think about how you can engage that particular network. And I do think that that is a simultaneous conversation with government as well. It's something that I think about really deeply because those are the organizations that are sort of at the forefront of supporting those job seekers as well. But we should talk after this because would love to learn more.
Can't AI literally just help if you can identify the background of people? It doesn't really matter where you come from, but if you can identify the background and then you can look at the jobs that are open, the skills, and then you could start to probably figure out through AI a better attachment point of where somebody could get skill training that would actually work for the jobs, and then the AI could work with. I mean, that's where I think AI would be very powerful to probably help identify this massive job database to the actual skills that in this case, immigrant comes with that could be matched up.
Yeah, and that's what we do at Future Fit AI, but I actually think another opportunity area here is language access and digital literacy as being the two biggest barriers before people even get in front of some of those tools. So I think those are real kind of opportunity areas to think about how to plug in, how to use AI to support in those issues as well.
I'm super grateful to Cuff and to Eli and to Jonathan and the team for bringing us together to have these conversations. As you're talking about this, it reminds me of some research we did a few years ago mapping a lot of the workforce development orgs in the city, and I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, maybe it's time to revive that with an AI layer and how we can reinvigorate that map, but with a matching component driven by AI. And so we're so lucky to have you all here kind of centering these conversations, thinking about the future of New York, thinking about how we get it right. I'm super grateful. And I am right on time. Jonathan.
On that note, I just want to thank this panel. Can we get another hand for this panel? That was one of the best panel discussions we've had. I never once looked at my watch, which I don't have, or my phone.